Time is measured by progress toward the human ideal, the fullness of awakened human consciousness. And what happens to a human being who does not advance, who does not move? They begin to be moved by external circumstances. They become a mere plaything in the hands of external circumstances. Hello, welcome. Recently, we held a lecture, even live, where I spoke a little about Cicero, the Roman orator and statesman who lived from 106 to 43 BCE. On that occasion, we discussed his biography and the essence of his ideas. Today, our goal is to reflect on some of his thoughts. For each one, I will mention the source, and we will take a moment to reflect on it. These are thoughts taken from some of Cicero's treatises. For those who are more curious, in that first lecture, I even listed some of his main treatises and spoke about the historical impact of this thinker. Shall we then explore a bit of his thought? The first excerpt I brought is from a treatise called On Duties, which, as a reminder, was the second book printed by Gutenberg after the Holy Bible. Shall we explore it then? No aspect of life, whether public or private, whether concerning domestic matters, individual affairs, or bilateral contracts, is exempt from obligations or duties. In fact, it is in the cultivation of these duties that the integrity of life is fully realized, whereas neglecting their values leads to dishonor. This idea simply conveys that there is no place you can go without carrying your values with you. There are no exceptions, no dark little corner where you can leave your duties and values hanging at the door. I often joke with my students about the way our physical homes are arranged, particularly that little storage room in the back where we keep all the clutter. In other words, the house may be spotless and well organized, but when you open that cluttered room, chaos reigns inside. I usually say that this kind of concession, if we allow it in our physical environment, we also allow it in our psychological and mental spaces, because there is a tendency for everything to align according to a single principle. Our nature seeks stability. It seeks harmony on all levels. In other words, if you make concessions to chaos, you will find chaos creeping into every aspect of your life. This is very similar to what Cicero is talking about here. Neither in public nor in private, neither alone nor in the company of others, do you ever have the right to disregard your obligations and duties. It is important to preserve dignity even when you are alone with yourself. Rude and unworthy behavior, unrefined and coarse language, nowhere do you have the right to leave your human identity at the door and enter in a dehumanized manner. Because that small lapse in attention, that opening to chaos, is a point through which it can expand in moments of crisis. Beyond that, it also creates illegitimacy. If I believe in the cosmos, then I must live by it fully. Otherwise, I do not truly believe it is merely a convention. If I believe in harmony, if I believe in a world governed by values, then I must uphold that belief in every environment I pass through. My path will be a human path, that is, a luminous path, one that adds value to the world. Otherwise, I do not truly believe in values. I am merely maintaining a civilized facade to grant myself some status in society. But that is not what I truly appreciate, nor is it what I truly believe in. So, this first passage about duties is very interesting. Let's move on to the next one. All these initial phrases come from the same treatise on duties. Above all, it is inherent to human nature to seek and discover the truth. When freed from burdens and tasks required for survival, one becomes eager to see, hear, and learn. I find this phrase by Cicero interesting. In other words, when you are not struggling for survival, not tending to your body's rest or nourishment, you should use all the remaining time to learn. This is interesting because it is a very Western perspective, certainly a good one. But if you consider the Eastern view on this, a Shankaracharya from Vedanta, for example, has a different perspective. He says that even when we are dedicated to survival, our focus should still be on learning. In other words, when you prepare your food, there is something there for you to learn. Because otherwise, you wouldn't be there and you wouldn't be doing it that way. You would have found another way, another solution, another lifestyle. In other words, even in necessity, there is learning for these Eastern philosophers. It's not just something you do as a mere tribute to survival. Within survival, there must also be life, because that is what defines a human survival rather than a merely animalistic one. So his idea that the pursuit of truth, the love for truth, should reign constantly in all places is of extraordinary relevance in our times. If we could dive deep within ourselves and examine our hierarchy of priorities, we would find that we are filled with things that we value more than truth. Things that benefit us in some way, that feed our pride, that diminish the pride of our detractors. That increase our material interests, that reduce the interests of others, that make our causes prevail at the expense of others' causes. In other words, our selfishness, projected in all its forms, is generally more important to us than the truth. You enter into a discussion with someone, and even if your lucidity makes an appearance for a moment, turning on a small light and signaling that what the other person is saying is more truthful than your own stance, you still refuse to concede, speaking in common terms, because you do not seek the truth, you seek victory at any cost. You want to prove that you are better than that person, no matter the price. Love for truth, love for wisdom, love for learning, if we had only these, it would already make a tremendous difference. There is a passage from Plato in the dialogue The Republic, which I find marvelous, where he says that he could transform an utterly chaotic state into an absolutely harmonious one by changing just a single element, by placing the wisest person in charge. The wisest and not necessarily the most cultured, in quotation marks. Do you realize that this doesn't happen only within a state? Does this also happen within us? We would have a much more harmonious life if we adjusted just this one element, if we allowed love for truth, love for wisdom, to guide us without any kind of inclination, as Kant would say, inclination toward our own interests, without distortions. This is the root of corruption. We corrupt the truth, preferring a version that aligns with our own interests. And from this initial corruption, all others are born. It would be an excellent exercise if we could align all the major problems we face today and trace them back to their root. For example, the root of corruption that we just discussed. Have you ever thought about the root of prejudice? Close your eyes. Imagine what is our fundamental attitude toward life. My personality is superior to everyone else's. Its interests, its values, its thoughts are superior to everyone else's. When you open your eyes and look in the mirror, you see what race you belong to, what political party you support, what religion you follow. And what belongs to you automatically holds a higher status than what belongs to others. From this arise sexual prejudices, religious prejudices, and prejudices of all kinds. It arises from personalistic prejudice, from believing that my personality is superior to everyone else's. And who does not suffer from this prejudice? Who does not suffer? Do you think we will solve all other prejudices if we do not address this one first? We believe we are solving prejudices by clashing in the streets against them. Yet, we do not heal the source of prejudice within ourselves. Well, this is philosophy. Let us go to the root causes. Perhaps, at the very origin of those problems you despise, you yourself are one of the sources generating them. In general, we suffer from the snowball that turns into an avalanche over our home. Yet, we are among those standing at the top of the mountain, throwing snowballs. And we do not connect one thing to the other. Surely, we are all deeply involved with the root of the major problems we face today. Thus, love and wisdom would be the first preventive measure for today's challenges. Excellent, extremely effective. Even those devoted to research and the dedicated pursuit of knowledge, when suddenly cautioned of imminent danger and divisions in their homeland, if given the chance to come to its aid, abandon everything even if they were in the midst of counting the stars and measuring the dimensions of the universe. Notice, I won't elaborate too much on this reasoning, but Plato develops this idea in a very interesting way when he seeks justice, once again in that dialogue, the Republic. Good is everything that unites, and evil is everything that divides. The internal divisions that occur within a state are similar to the internal divisions that take place within the human body. These divisions will ultimately destroy us. In fact, the defining characteristic of a dead body is precisely that each part begins to separate from the others. It is a total disintegration of its parts. That is a decomposing corpse, not a living body. So, if things are destroyed by what separates them, the greatest evil is separation. When we abandon common, humanistic goals, the pursuit of truth, in favor of personal objectives, sometimes tainted by passions that are not very lucid, because no passion that condemns a body to death can be lucid. When we let go of all these things and focus on the ideal of life and life in integration, we realize that we are far more capable of contributing to life as a whole, both individually and socially. He will say here that this social life, this sense of patriotism that was so strong in Cicero, this social life, to defend it, a man should set aside even a research endeavor dedicated to uncovering the mystery of the stars. Any man with a sense of honor and love for his homeland would immediately stop and go to its defense. Then you might say, in my last lecture, I touched on this topic a little. Well, but Cicero had a rather exaggerated sense of patriotism. For him, only Rome mattered. He himself responds to this issue. In one of his letters to one of his closest friends, most of his letters were addressed to this person, who is Atticus. He says, "Some will say that I love Rome so much that I despise foreigners. And I tell you that I love Rome so much that I can understand the love that every foreigner has for their own land and respect it. Without this love, one cannot understand nor respect the love that others have for their homeland. When the piece of land that has given us all our sustenance, all the life we have had until now, holds no value for us, then no other place will have value for us either." I remembered that phrase I love to repeat, the deeper within, the further beyond. The more I cultivate love for the human condition, for the land, for the piece of earth that has nourished me and kept me alive for so many years, the more I also respect, in a broader sense, all lands, all lives, everything that is part of existence, as equally worthy. It is like a good father who deeply respects his own family and also knows how to respect the families of others. Through this love, he understands the love of others. To judge what is useful as superior to what is honest, weighing both dimensions in the realm of doubt, there is nothing more corrupt and harmful, especially when it comes to duties. In other words, he will develop the understanding that utility must always be connected to goodness. The useful does not compete with the good, the useful is a means, while the good is the end. Therefore, we should have a very clear understanding of what is truly useful. Something is useful if it helps us grow as human beings, even if it is not always pleasant, even if at times it may be painful. But the useful must always be connected to the good. Utility that is disconnected from human goodness and goodness is not relative. It is human goodness, which represents the fulfillment of the human condition, meaning the fullness of values, virtues, and wisdom. When utility is connected to this, then yes. Is unity connected to this? Yes. That is true utility. But if you take utility on its own, it can serve the corrupt interests of someone or the selfishness of an individual. Therefore, be cautious with this concept of utility. Later, in England, during the 17th century, utilitarianism emerged with full force, seemingly ignoring this past, ignoring all the work of Cicero, who strongly criticized this utilitarian perspective. Notice that utility is what keeps all things integrated, organically alive and moving toward the good. Increasing one's wealth at the expense of another's loss is far more against nature than death, poverty, pain, or any other hardship. Also, a phrase I mentioned in our last meeting about Cicero, which is very interesting because what he says is that death, poverty, pain. Any hardship inherent to nature, since it is unlikely that we will go through life without experiencing some of these at some point, is much more easily overcome and integrated than a human being harming the well-being of another, because that is against nature. Once again, take the reference of the body. The reference of the human body is a very good one. It helps you understand what is harmonious because our body is harmonious. Life knows how to create highly harmonious systems. So if it falls ill, that is part of nature. If at certain moments your energy is low or depleted, that is part of nature. But what is not part of nature is for one hand to want to steal from the other. For one hand to want to mutilate the foot to appear more important than it. That is against nature, that is foolish, that is suicidal. He says this must be the most serious phenomenon in humanity. In the act of punishing, do not be guided by anger, but by fairness. In other words, in the act of punishing, a person should not be driven by passions, revenge, or hatred. He must have the pure impartiality of someone who desires nothing other than the well-being of the one being punished. Indeed, well-being seeks to do what is necessary for that person to awaken, become aware of the harm they have caused, and have the opportunity to reform. Otherwise, punishment turns into revenge. And revenge, in all philosophical systems throughout human history, has been unanimously considered immoral. There comes a certain moment when even St. Augustine speaks about this. In a phrase that I greatly appreciate from his Confessions, he says that revenge is a form of unconscious atheism. It is as if you believe that no law exists. We live in a world where people act without facing any consequences for their actions. And therefore, if I do not take revenge, nothing will happen. That person will go unpunished. In other words, they do not believe in a system of cause and effect, an intelligence governing everything. They do not believe in God. It is a form of unconscious atheism that emerges in such moments. If I do not take justice into my own hands, nothing will happen. Thus, justice should never be vengeful. It is indeed punitive, but it is also educational. It works toward redemption, toward the awakening of that human being's conscience, so that they may, in some way, recognize the wrong they have done and seek redemption. The idea is the integration of all, ensuring that no one is left behind, that no one is excluded, no matter how long or difficult that path may be. And mind you, he was a great jurist, a remarkable lawyer. In Rome, orator was the title given to lawyers. They were great defenders of causes, and they held this perspective on punishment. Indeed, O gods, what could be more desirable and more beneficial, and therefore more worthy for a human being, than philosophy? Whoever cultivates it is called a friend of wisdom. I find this very beautiful because Cicero often lamented the fact that Socrates was able to gather a small crowd to listen to him. In Rome, however, anyone who took the orator's podium to speak purely about philosophy would no longer find an audience willing to listen. This was no longer interesting, nor was it considered useful. And this excessively practical and utilitarian aspect of Rome he regarded as an ambassador, a messenger of philosophy, so that the Romans could understand and listen to it. He elevates the Latin language to a noble status, which it had not possessed until then. And he seeks to build a bridge between philosophy and the Roman citizen, because he believed that this was extremely necessary to educate him, to shape him in values, so that he would not be tossed back and forth by fleeting conventions, passing trends, or collective thoughts of little value. Behind eloquence, behind everything he loved so much, he believed that the most valuable thing was philosophy, as it had the power to bring wisdom to human life and was, therefore, the only true path. and he was a translator of this philosophy for the Latin people. Wisdom is the knowledge of all divine and human things, as well as their causes. If such a study were to be disregarded, then I could never understand how anything else could be worthy of appreciation. In fact, when one considers the way to attain constancy in virtue, either this will be the method to achieve such a goal, or there will be no other. In other words, wisdom as the pursuit of knowledge of all things is the only method he believes exists for a person to attain constancy and virtue. And the attainment of constancy and virtue is the only way he believes one can establish a state worthy of human beings. Therefore, one thing is interconnected with the others. Philosophy is the love of wisdom, and there should be nothing else that a person loves more. If he wants to become a true citizen, if he wants to shape a truly human state, which is an invitation for all its members to harmonize and become more human each day. It is quite interesting how precise he is about this. Either this is the path, or I know of no other. And honestly, I truly believe there is no other. Why would a person become a better human being if they do not believe in wisdom? If they do not believe in human values? Why? Still on duties. More people perish, victims of the fury of their fellow humans in wars and revolutions, than in any other kind of calamity. I find this statement very intriguing. Any calamity, any plague, any disease has not claimed as many lives as human beings themselves in their daily social interactions. To victimize on all levels, from moral offense to the destruction of the other, from the experience of what the Greeks called the myth of Procrustes, Beto, you remember that? It is the mythical character who forced travelers and wanderers to lie on a small bed, and whatever exceeded the bed in length, whether head or feet, would cut off. No one can be greater than the social standard without being severely punished for it. In other words, out of envy, competition, pride, greed, and various forms of selfishness, humanity has been its own greatest destroyer. We could consider reversing this. Rather than being the greatest promoters of death, we could become the greatest promoters of life, its allies, working in its favor. This statement is striking and profoundly painful. By nature, we are inclined to love our fellow human beings. And this is the foundation of law. Law exists to smooth out the rough edges of what prevents one human being from being there for another. Because that is what our nature dictates. That we exist for one another, humanity is social by nature from its most distant roots. Man is a social being. Man was made, human beings were made for one another, as Marcus Aurelius would say. And therefore, law smooths out the rough edges, clearing away the obstacles that hinder human communion. These obstacles, whether internal or external, generally originate within man himself, after all, in the final analysis. Natural law is a reflection of divine reason. From this arises the resemblance between man and God. Thus, when human beings recognize the laws of nature as also being their own laws, since human nature is part of nature as a whole, they align, they follow the same purpose. The means may differ, we use human means, but the ends remain the same. All of nature seeks harmony, seeks unity as its ultimate goal. When we realize that our inclinations, our fulfillment, and even human happiness rely on the fulfillment of these laws of our human nature, we recognize our kinship with God. Our affinity with the Word of God is expressed through the laws of nature. Thus, man discovers his deepest identity when he perceives his connection with nature as a whole and aligns himself in harmony with it. Still within the treatise on laws, if fidelity to the gods is suppressed, then the very society of humankind and that most precious virtue, justice, are also eliminated. It is as if you imagine that all things are suspended from a single point, and this point is like the apex of a pyramid. From this point, everything finds its balance. Beings harmonize with one another as they draw closer to this point. Beings also harmonize within themselves as they draw closer to this point. But when this point is lost, when it detaches and things fall into horizontality, harmony is no longer possible, and thus justice becomes an imposition. Respect becomes an imposition. Duties turn into obligations that are enforced rather than embraced as a necessity. There is a shift from conviction to coercion. People do not perceive. Obedience to laws as a privilege. They begin to feel it as a punishment, a yoke, an unnecessary submission. In other words, if there is no connection to purpose at the highest level, everything in between is lost. I recall an example that I often share in my lectures. I speak of a person who is an enemy of the sun. She has closed all her doors and windows and wants nothing to do with the sun. One day, she decided to make peace with the sun, opened her doors and windows, and realized that in both cases, her distance from the sun remained exactly the same. She had not moved, but simply by being willing to be in contact with the sun, it already illuminated her where she was. The idea of God, the idea of unity, already illuminates us where we are and justifies the laws, justifies virtues, and justifies a life well lived. If you do not have this purpose, you fall into darkness, and doors and windows close. If there is no contact with the sun, you live in darkness. Embrace the law is the divine mind. The law, fit to command or forbid, is the right reason of the supreme God. A right that contradicts the nature of the human being lacks authenticity. So, one of Cicero's great struggles is that human law turns its back on divine law. What we call positive law cannot turn its back on natural law, which is the very arm of God extended over the cosmos, as the Hindus would say. When this discord, this dissension occurs, the law no longer promotes the evolution of humankind. It may even lead to stagnation and perhaps even regression. To ensure that we have a law that promotes human development, we must guarantee that this law is an adaptation of natural law to the human realm. Throughout his work, this concern about the discord between these two worlds is a constant theme. It is inconceivable that humans would seek harmony, build a city, establish rules, create laws, and yet those laws hinder the development of the human being. It would be better for him to remain in the wild, as the laws of nature would guide him more effectively. This is a struggle he upholds throughout his entire life. A human being, by the very fact of being human, can never be a stranger to another human being. A responsible, good, wise individual who is obedient to the laws precisely because they are aware of their social dimension thinks more about the common good than personal interest. This already belongs to the treatise de finibus on ultimate ends. This is a fundamental and relevant matter. Take a look. A responsible, good, wise individual who is obedient to the laws, precisely because they are aware of their social dimension, thinks more about the common good than personal interest. In other words, they think more about the whole than the part. What is good for the beehive is good for the bee, but what is good only for the bee is not always good for the beehive. In other words, a lucid man is coherent with his human condition and will start from the whole to the part, otherwise, he becomes a destructive cell within the whole. A selfish cell is a cancerous cell. This is his concern, that the focus of human decisions should always be greater than mere personal benefit so that man does not become unworthy. At times, in very critical situations in the history of humanity, even in situations where life is at risk, not even then do human beings stop thinking only about themselves and their own interests. That is, if the immediacy of death does not change our focus, what will? Perhaps only when death knocks directly at our own door. When it knocks at the door of the whole. Sometimes, not even that is enough to convince man to think about the whole, and he continues to focus on his own interests. For Cicero, this is unworthy of the human condition. Man is no longer truly a human being. His neglect has stripped him of his most precious condition. He is not worthy of it. Indeed, that which is always in motion is eternal. That which receives movement from another and is moved by it ceases to live. Necessarily, when that movement comes to an end. This is why, in the being that moves itself, lies the principle of movement. In it, there is neither birth nor death. This passage belongs to the treatise The Dream of Scipio. It is quite interesting, very beautiful a short treatise, but highly metaphysical. It tells the story of Cornelius Scipio, the grandson of a great Roman general, Scipio Africano, who was regarded as a highly virtuous man. In it, he dreams of his grandfather and his father. They teach him many things about life, the future that awaits him, about death, and about the meaning of life as a whole. Therefore, it is a purely metaphysical treatise by Cicero. I draw your attention to what he is saying here. That which has its own movement is eternal. Consider that none of us is perfect. And the meaning of life, according to these classical traditions, is to leave this world better than when we entered it. In other words, there must be movement. Our consciousness must shed light on our deepest essence. Our consciousness must expand, must rise. If no step is taken in this direction, then time has not truly existed for you. You are in inertia. You are still in chaos. You have not yet entered the realm of Chronos, as Greek mythology described. Time is measured by progress toward the human ideal, the fullness of awakened human consciousness. And what happens to a human being who does not advance, who does not move? They begin to be moved by external circumstances. They become a mere plaything in the hands of external circumstances. That is what he says here. He is moved. And when he ceases to be moved by circumstances, he dies. Because there is no longer any possibility of movement for him. He has no capacity for self-movement. In other words, the one who is awake, conscious, and always taking another step toward their essence, that one is immortal. There is nothing that can prevent a being from continuing to walk toward the sun, toward the fullness of their human essence. But the one who delegates this engagement to circumstances, who relinquishes the right to develop their own values, who surrenders the right to choose their own principles, who gives up the right to open or not the human windows, and to see the sun, that person will never be more than a puppet of circumstances. It is convenient, but it means surrendering your life. What do you live for? I find it curious that we are living in a historical moment, yet people consider it valid. Some people have delegated the right to think for themselves, so you arrive in a world that is completely divided. All these divisions are in conflict with one another, each filled with arguments, and instead of questioning this entire array of options presented to you, you randomly choose any position. You assume it, become contaminated by its passions, and spend your entire life being thought for. To delegate the right to think, to delegate the right to feel, to delegate the right to build yourself, means that you were lived, you did not truly live. And if there is no movement, it does not mean you will not find eternity. It means you have not even found your earthly life, let alone what comes after. It's not that you won't die, you have already died. Only mere physical survival remains alive. In other words, the idea of eternity as continuous consciousness, always seeking expansion, always seeking light. If you do not pursue this, you become a mere plaything in the hands of circumstances. Once again, the dream of Scipio. This return to the heavens becomes faster if, even while still bound to the body, the soul projects itself beyond it through the contemplation of external realities, distancing itself as much as possible from the physical form. In other words, that a person may live in the world, fulfill their obligations, but not merely be an inhabitant of it, rather, someone with the ability to see beyond, to perceive the meaning of life as a whole, the purpose of human existence, the reason for our presence on earth, and what we are here to contribute to the world. Does this world gain from the existence of humanity, or does it lose? How can I ensure that humanity adds value to the world? Why is it that humanity came into the world? What necessity brought us here? What is the meaning of existence? What is my role in the midst of all this? What is the key that I carry within me own that could be a word of contribution, a step forward that holds value for the whole? It doesn't matter whether it is small or great. What matters is whether I have delivered my message to the world, whether I have communicated my essence, whether I have expressed my purpose, whether that has been fulfilled. Do you realize that today, all these thoughts are often considered speculative and useless? Yet they are the most useful of all, because they tell us where we are heading with all of this, and whether the direction we are taking truly brings us closer to what nature expects of us as human beings. In other words, whether our life is being endowed with meaning. This kind of reflection, he says, the more you engage in it, the more it is seen as speculation beyond mere physical survival. Perhaps, if you believe in a metaphysical life, then when physical survival is lost, that which is not tied to it may not be lost. In other words, man begins to develop a thirst for the metaphysical, which makes him less dependent solely on survival. This is what that African elder told his grandson in this treatise. The Catalanarians, a famous speech of his against Catalan, perhaps the one that immortalized him the most. I have always held the opinion that I rejected as a title of glory any divine enmity toward virtue. What an interesting thing. I did not want to be loved at any cost. For me, the fact that I am just, that I am at peace with my conscience, and that people do not like me because of it, that to me is a title of glory. The fact that people do not like me because I develop my talents to the fullest, so that I have something to give to the people around me, to offer a gift to humanity, to give meaning to my life. To me, that is glory. That they do not like me for being human, to me, is recognition. I have always believed that considering any divine enmity of virtue as a title of glory is a worthy stance. I do not want to be loved at any price. And those who do not love you for being human, precisely for that reason, well, at the very least, they had a reference of what it means to be a human being. At some point, life forces them to change their stance, and that reference remains. Even for them, you are adding value. On friendship, another beautiful reflection. I believe that friendship can only exist between good individuals. It is virtue itself that creates and sustains friendship, for without virtue, friendship cannot exist. Do you understand this idea? We are imperfect, but we each possess a measure of virtue. As Plato says, we are a mixture of both, a blend of light and shadow. He states that true relationships are not merely a complicity of flaws. They are built upon the highest point of consciousness. They are a union of virtues, formed by the best within us. Cicero is a strong advocate of this same idea. The notion is that friendship arises from a sense of need. Why do I have a friend? Because I feel very alone. They can help me, because I am in need of someone to support me. Friendship built on need is dependence, not true friendship. Friendship based on flaws is complicity, not true friendship. Only the friendship that is built upon virtues is truly valid. It is that friend who is able to come to you and say, "You are wrong, and because I love you, I am telling you this." It is the kind of friendship that adds value to your life, that is capable of correcting you, even when all voices around you praise you. It is the friend who is capable of reminding you who you are, who safeguards each other's true identity and recalls it when one forgets. For him, this is the only true friendship. It is built upon virtues. Still speaking about friendship, in true friendship, There is no pretense. Everything that is expressed is genuine and voluntary. For this reason, it seems to me that friendship arises more from nature than from necessity, more from a spontaneous impulse of the spirit wrapped in mutual affection than from a calculated expectation of future benefit. In other words, a relationship formed out of mere necessity is not truly friendship, it is more like companionship. When it is based on personal deficiencies, it becomes the use of another person to fill what one lacks. Friendship is established between virtues. And there is nothing false, nothing fabricated, no intention of exploiting the other, no parasitism. There is an abundance. What I have that is best, I share with you. And I am a guarantee that what you have that is best, you will not forget. The one who places the greatest trust in themselves, the one who is well equipped with virtue and wisdom, who does not feel the need for anyone. This is the one who excels in the art of winning and cultivating friendship. In other words, they are very well with themselves. Therefore, they can be well with others. Those who are not well with themselves fear solitude, cannot bear their own company. They will not be well with others. The other will become an object of use, so that they may find some stability, a witness to their personal experience, or a support for their weakness. That is not true friendship. The self-sufficient person, the one who is at peace with themselves, can be with another. And upon this foundation, true friendship is built. How rare they are in our times, and how genuine they are. If you have one, cherish it like a precious gem. Nothing is more lovable than virtue. Nothing is more compelling to love it than virtue itself. Through it and because of its value, we somehow love even those we have never seen. How fascinating that is! It is a true virtue. It draws love toward itself, even from those who have never met you and never will. It is difficult to read, for example, Cicero's treatises without feeling love for him. Where is Cicero? That is something distant in history. Where is Plato? He was an epitome. It is impossible to enter the world of these men without coming out loving them. Do you know why? Virtue has the power to attract love even after 2,000 years. In any place, in any time, virtuous men draw to themselves the friendship of the good. There is no time or space that can prevent this from happening. Therefore, it is the most legitimate foundation upon which are built the profound questions of our lives. Friendship, love, solidarity, the state, the world, humanity all are established upon virtues. Friendship is a benevolent and affectionate agreement concerning all divine and human matters, as if it were a law of attraction among those who are truly human. I do not know if, apart from wisdom, anything better has been given to humanity by the immortal gods. That is, after wisdom, the ability to unite around the love of wisdom, which is the foundation of all virtues. After wisdom, the union of those who walk toward it, that is friendship. This is closely related to Plato's idea of soulmates. They are those who unite up there, in the highest plane, the one he referred to. This higher plane of consciousness is where those who love wisdom come together. Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic thinker, called an obscure one, he said, those who sleep. Those who sleep return to their own private worlds, but those who are awake share a common world. How beautiful is that? He said that there is a common world for those who are awake. And perhaps only in this shared world of the awakened does true friendship prevail. Those who sleep return to their private worlds, encapsulated by their own selfishness. Now, regarding the wisdom of aging. The pinnacle of old age is authority. After all, the wise pass away with serenity, while the foolish depart in great turmoil. Would this not be a sign that the soul of the first, the wise one, seeing clearly and far, perceives that it is soaring towards something better, while the other, with a narrow horizon, sees nothing ahead? Do you understand what the wise man perceives in the face of death? He must be seeing something very favorable. Do not say that he is blind, for he is wise is not ignorant, and the wise man sees far. What does the wise man see in the face of death that grants him such a peaceful passing? In other words, the anguish before death is a sign of those who see only what is near. They see only what they are losing, not what may be gained. In other words, they do not believe in transformation, in perpetual motion, in the continuous movement of the universe, which constantly carries beings from one level to another, from one moment to the next, from one experience to another as the process continues. Those who do not understand these laws of nature, who are unable to look toward their future with clarity, face death in a state of deep distress. In other words, merely observing the way a wise person faces death is enough to understand what wisdom can do for humanity. It is said that this was the reason why Socrates, despite being given the opportunity, refused to escape his execution. It is said that he wanted to teach people not only how a philosopher lives, but also how a philosopher dies. That this, too, could serve as a reference. Still within the wisdom of aging, I have lived in such a way that does not betray the purpose of my birth. Moreover, I bid farewell to life, as if leaving an inn, not my true home. In other words, my life leaves me so at peace with myself, so at peace with the laws of nature, that I have no reason to say that I have lived in vain. My life does not betray the purpose of my birth, and therefore it will not betray my death either. I have been worthy. Whoever looks at my path can say, a true human being passed through here. Therefore, I have no reason to face death with anything but peace. I feel as though I am leaving a temporary and not my true home. Look at how wonderful, how profound this is. And with that, we conclude some of Cicero's thoughts, merely as a reflection. Take a moment to think about it and consider, if you were to express these thoughts yourself, how would you feel about adopting such a stance toward life? This is a homework exercise. Think about it if you were to say each of these phrases and truly believe in them, making them your own. Observe how your mind organizes itself, how your emotions align, how this resonates within your psyche, and how you feel about life. These are teachings left by a great man. Great men became great because of what they were able to build within themselves and, consequently, what they contributed throughout history. Great men were those who were capable of giving much, not of possessing much. They gave so much that even today we continue to benefit from their generosity, from this gift, the presence of great men in the world. I hope you take some time to reflect on this and that it proves useful to you. A warm embrace.